about another one of Kazuo Ishiguro's novels. This one is Never Let Me Go. Um, I think that came out in about 2002? Yeah. Um, Never Let Me Go is an excellent novel. Yes, it was very popular. I think there is a movie. I didn't see it, but it looked like it had some well-known actors and was generally well made. I was a fan of Ishiguro um, before this book came out. This was the first one of his books that came out after I became a fan, so it was kind of like, I saw it and I was like, oh, okay, that's great. And it was very exciting because um, his previous books, he had, this is his sixth novel at this point, although it's only the third one that I'm talking about in one of these. But his previous books focused on the past. They focused on um, characters who felt haunted by unresolved elements in their past or in the world generally. His first books, Pale View of Hills and An Artist of the Floating World, are about characters living in Japan haunted by different elements of Japan's history in the 20th century. Remains of the Day, which was his first big success, was about the butler who felt haunted by what he could no longer conceal was his failures and his failures to make good decisions as a young man, as a younger man, and by his complicity with his employer's ethical failings. Then he did a book called The Unconsoled, which I haven't talked about because I need to reread it. It was an unusual book. It did not take place in the literal real world. It was more kind of like artificial. And I certainly enjoy books like that, but it just took me by surprise from Ishiguro because he had been so good about setting his stories in, the quote-unquote real world by walking that line between realism and artifice. And this book, The Unconsoled, went fully into artifice. It takes place in a sort of generic, nameless city. It has kind of a Kafka or Gogol von Kleist kind of feel. And I read it and I enjoyed it, but it was kind of like an oddity, and I need to reread it. And then the wonderful book When We Were Orphans, which I've talked about before, about a character who feels haunted by the events of his childhood and mysteries related to his parents, growing up in Shanghai in the 1930s. Did a really good job of extending the elements of Remains of the Day across a younger man's life, whereas Stevens in Remains of the Day is haunted by these things that he didn't do, by these relationships he failed to make and stands he failed to take. Christopher in When We Were Orphans is younger and in a position to think that there's something that he could do about it. So he's got a more active attitude and is like sort of trying to discover the past, whereas Stephen knows the past. It's just more about letting himself fully be aware of what his actions in the past mean and what they meant, whereas Christopher is still discovering the past. So the past, right? That was Ishiguro, and then Never Let Me Go came along, and it was immediately fascinating. First, because it is in the future, or in an alternate version of our reality. Yeah, I think that's right. But the whole implication is that it's in a possible future, and then the characters are children who are inhabiting a school, which I believe, I'm working from memory here, is called Hailsham, and the focus is in on three of them. One of them is thinking back over her time at Hailsham as a young adult. I get the feeling she's about 30. She is thinking over her time, but in Hailsham with a close friend and a boy um, who they all went to this school and sort of grew up together. Um, and this is again one of those books with sort of an overall mystery. So I'm going to have to kind of talk around that because I don't. It is important that it have some element of surprise. I think when you're reading the book, if the effects of the book are going to build and work as they should. But anyway, there is a mystery connected to their school, and Ishiguro just does such a superb job of letting this mystery intermix with just the day-to-day life of these kids, and also to give such a feeling that this is such a universal experience, that we grow up, engaged and living day to day, and only in pieces and fragments do these sort of mysterious elements related to our lives and what we're expected to do as adults begin to emerge. And what these kids at Hailsham are expected to do as adults is shocking, and yet it's so familiar, if not directly to you, then to people you know. This story works really well both on a realistic level. There are some science fictional elements that work both on a real, possibly we might have to seriously think about this one day kind of level, but also on just that hugely symbolic level that makes you think that in some ways the deeper issues we're already dealing with every single day, and we do it without even thinking about it. Anyway, the overall construction of the book is wonderful. The detailed passages between the characters and what they want and what they've sort of quietly, unconsciously taken into themselves as to what they can expect out of their lives are superb. And there's a few moments that are so well done. There's a moment about when the main character is thinking back, and she's about 10 or 11, and she's in a room in the school that has a record player, and she has a little doll, and she's holding the doll and dancing around, singing along, rocking the doll like she's the doll's mama, and she's singing along to the song that has a repeated refrain, "Never let me go, never let me go, baby, baby, never let me go." And she describes what she's thinking, and then she looks up and she sees one of the adults of the school, one of the teachers or the staff, looking at her with this strange expression and almost about to burst into tears, or maybe they do burst into tears, and they run off. And that's one of those moments where you're like, what did I do? What's going on? why should that have made that person? And you're just transported back to childhood so well in this scene, and that feeling of poking the world around you without realizing it, and watching it react and wondering why, what did that mean? It's really affecting. That's fairly early on in the book. I remember the book as having a scene and a moment that good just all the time, just almost, you have to have space and let these things build, and that's one of the things Ishiguro does really well, and that the novel in general still does really well, is give space for effects to build. I don't know, looking now that I've it's been 20 years since I read the book, and I've read other things, I'm just even more impressed with the control over time and length. Ishiguro is an extremely carefully controlled writer. When I think of who to compare him to, I think of just the best, Flaubert, Henry James, Austen. Just the people who are just the best. He completely deserves the Nobel Prize from a skill as an artist point of view, although the Nobel Prize is given for more like using literature for social good point of view, and he definitely does that. But if they gave it on a purely artistic level, he would still deserve it, because he's that good at placing his words and timing out his moments. I find, yeah, so it's a hugely evocative novel. I can't say too much without possibly reducing the pleasure of reading it, but do read it. It's one of the, gotta be one of the top English language novels of the century so far. And also for me anyway, I thought I knew what an Ishiguro novel would be, and this one just completely blew the lid off that and showed that he was, moving into new territory. And the there is still that element of looking back at the past, because there is this device in the book of the 30-year-old version of the child looking back at their childhood, but it keeps getting closer to the actual moments of transition and trauma and suffering, which, until then, like in the prior books, you had that distance of the past, and that was part of like sort of the melancholy and the sort of like bittersweet elements in his tone that his work had. And this one gets you closer, keep getting closer, until we get to his since Never Let Me Go. I mean, it's been 20 years. He's released 3 books, and I think he's worked on some movies. I'm not going to talk about one of them, which is a collection of novellas called Nocturnes, because it's fine, but that's as far as I'll go. But his next 2 books, his next 2 novels, are just superb. They build so well, and his artistry just expands out so well into new territory. I'm not sure I'll be able to talk about them without just gushing like every minute about how good they are. Okay, Never Let Me Go. Go read it. It's great.